control foliar insecticides. Anything with bifenthrin, whether it be a branded product or a generic such as Discipline and some of the others, by and large, are very, very effective. Other pyrethroids, the Warriors, the Asanas, those types, they're as effective. I've always seen really good results with bifenthrin, without a doubt. But the contact, it's important that it's contact. This is some bioassay work we've done where we're actually treating leaves, treating leaves with insecticides in the laboratory, dipping them, putting them in petri dishes and putting adults in there to see what the contact activity. What you can see is the pyrethroid is by far the most active at the lowest rates, or lowest concentrations in this case, followed by the lors band, again, another contact. And then lanate's not bad, but again, it takes a lot higher concentrations and it doesn't seem, at least from build out efficacy, doesn't seem to have the residual control. And then finally, the neonicotinoids, and in this case, this was dinotetrad or venom, they have activity, but to get 100%, it takes extremely high rates, sometimes above label. But that's just really what we're doing this work for, is we're trying to establish baselines so that 2, 3, 4 years down the road, if someone's got an issue with a pyrethroid or something, we can come back in and see if there's actually been some resistance building up. This is one of the trials we ran, an average of 3 sprays every 7 days. These treatments highlighted in red are the 3 pyrethroids that were looked at, 3 consecutive shots back to back to back. That provided overall the most consistent control of bugs on average in this trial. We had 3 treatments where we started with 3 different neonicotinoids by themselves, second application in combination with a pyrethroid, and then followed up with a different pyrethroid on the 3rd spray. You can see less consistent activity. And then just the old lorsban, and this Belief, which is an anti-feeding compound, did not do very well. Even though the lorsban knocked them down, it was very short-lived. Malathion and dimethoate, even with the last shot being hero, did not perform very good. So those old school OPs in particular don't seem to have the same level of activity as the pyrethroids relative to the untreated control. Now what's interesting, that was one thing, but then when you looked at the plots, I don't know if this shows up very well, but you can see these plots right here stick out like a sore thumb. And this is 14 days after the 3rd application. Relative to the untreated control, this is untreated, these are buffers on the side. You look at that scorpion brigade, which was scorpion, which is the same as venom, followed by the combination, and then ended up with brigade. Look at those plants, they're robust, they've got color, 3 consecutive shots of brigade, not quite the sheen to them, but they had the size. And then of course there's the malathion and dimethoate, really no different than untreated.
So are you suggesting a pyrethroid plus a neonic as a combo would have some potential here? Is that what that?
Looking at that slide, that's what you concluded, correct?
That's what it looks like.
But what I forgot, I did too at first, but you know what catches your eyes? You forget, okay, there's nothing in here. We don't do anything with these plots. We don't put anything in the soil. We didn't chemigate. You know why these stand out like a sore thumb? Whiteflies. We did the whitefly control from the scorpion. So it looks really, really good. But what part of the plant response we're seeing there is the whitefly control from the scorpion. And it kind of shows from the brigade, because the brigade's not a real good whitefly material. So again, just a little lesson I learned. But nonetheless, numbers-wise, it looked pretty good.
But program-wise...
But to answer your question, Kurt, let me answer your question. This was a separate trial we conducted on a wet day of September 23rd. So now we're getting back into a period where the activity is not nearly as heavy. It's subsided somewhat. We looked at combinations of hero, belay, danitolacel, lanidacel. That's this red combination, or this green, or each of those separately. And you'll notice the red line, which is just the neonicotinoid by itself, belay or 2 shots of a cell, did not perform real well in this particular study. You'll notice, and somebody had asked me about this earlier, the combination of the 2, I think we were talking about, the combination of the 2 tended to help out with residual control. So the neonicotinoid in combination with pyrethroid, that's the green versus the blue, did appear to provide some residual knockdown, relatively speaking. But when you look at the damage, we measured damage, the type of feeding numbers, it really wasn't different. It was significantly lower than the neonicotinoid by itself. And again, Neonicotinoids have very little, based on what we saw in our contact bioassays, petri dish bioassays, very little contact activity. And you can tell by the amount of damage that we observed, a number of plants with feeding damage. That's kind of what we saw. What about soil systemics? I got real excited again early last year where I did some early work in July actually with one of the seed companies looking at putting these bands down, and I was seeing what I thought was some activity. What we were doing was banding the full rate as you would inject underneath the seed line right over the seed, essentially providing a super duper seed treatment, if you will. A high rate seed treatment right over the seed and sprinkling it in and then coming back in and counting. Again, looking at those plots, you see Alias. This is a 16 ounces of Alias sticking out like a sore thumb, and then the high rate of belay. Very similar to neonicotinoids, don't move much in the soil, probably kept them right up there where the seed was. You'll notice some of these other soil insecticides around didn't perform very well. But again, that's all we did to it. And part of what we're seeing there is whitefly control.
That's imidacloprid, right?
That's imidacloprid. Part of the response, that standout, is whitefly control. So we didn't design this properly to discriminate between what's whitefly control and what's Bagrada. Although overall these plants have much less feeding damage on them. But we actually did a study shortly thereafter, same wet day as that previous study, where we came in with row covers to exclude, keep the Bagrada completely off these plants. Whiteflies had pretty much diminished at that time. We did that same soil band with Alias, and then we had untreated plots right here like this. So basically we had protected. We left these on for 20 days, very similar to the other way, to keep them protected. The question will be is, oh well, how can these plants grow underneath the row cover? They grew really well. They grew really well. This is the row cover, two rows of the row covers. They grew real robustly.
Did it stink through over here?
Well, they had so much other things to feed on. Why go in the row cover when you had all this untreated stuff around it? It's not like taking a 40-acre or 10-acre block and completely covering it. This is the Alias. It looks pretty good too. Then my eye's biased. To me, it looks like these are less robust plants than the untreated. When you look at the numbers, this is what's interesting. When you look at the numbers, and we did chemigate this trial just to kind of knock the edge off the bugs. You look at basically the first 2 weeks of emergence. This is after wet day. So these plants have been out of the ground for 2 weeks up to this red point here. The untreated, the numbers were still fairly low when you're talking about 1 per 15 plants. Still fairly low, but really nothing. We found nothing where the admired soil band was. So I'm concluding at this point, hey, this stuff is doing what I thought it would do. But when you get beyond that point, this is the point where we pull the row covers off, all of a sudden it's almost like it's gone. We saw nothing. We saw no activity. I mean, again, no different from the untreated check. And I'm not sure what's going on, whether the numbers were very, very low here, trying to rebuild back after the chemigations, or the fact that it just doesn't have any residual with this type of use pattern. Had we injected it 2 inches below, maybe we would have seen something different. I don't know. Row cover did quite well. We had a little bit of a blip there. And then again, at 30 days, we sprayed the entire block just to keep everything down. Now here we did come in and pull some yielding. What we did here is we actually wanted to see what about stand incidence, seedling mortality or plant mortality. Basically, row cover, Alias, untreated, basically nothing. No differences between. So we weren't seeing an impact on the plants. Certainly you wouldn't expect to see it here because they were covered up in rows. But we did see it with blind plants. The row cover had less than about 2% blind plants, which is probably normal, could be. Everything else, the Alias and the untreated, a little over 15%. So even after that 14 days when we weren't finding the bugs, we still experienced blind plants. So again, there's something going on there that isn't explained. Then if you look at what we consider marketable crowns, at Alias, just very inconsistent. Wasn't different from the untreated and wasn't different from the row cover. Basically means, in my estimation, that it really didn't do much. It didn't help you in this particular case.
John, was the Alias, you probably said so, but was it followed by other foliar applications?
Only at 30 days when we blanketed the entire chest.
Okay.
Only at the end of that 30 days. So basically, where we're at, again, just to summarize and end, is that we've got 3 general areas that I think play critical roles in trying to get a handle on this pest. assuming that it's going to be around, and I truly feel it's going to be around for a while. See, over summering seasonality, at what point do you need to treat, or at what point can you quit treating? And then, what are some of the alternatives to pyrethroids, whether they be soil or foliar, that can be used? And then finally, this one, this is more of my interest, is that what's better, chemigation, which is a quick and easy way to get that product out there right when the plant's coming out of the ground, or is it worth spending an extra $10 to $15 to come over the top and get a much more concentrated spray droplet on a very, very small plant? Any questions? Actually, what I would say is, does anybody have any input or any suggestions? Because these are 3 research areas that we've kind of identified that we're going to focus on to try to ask this question, so we know more about it for the next few years.
You are going to do extended rope covers, right? You guys see that up there?
No, but that's going to be part of trying to figure out this damage as an exclusion method of exclusion.
Would you recommend a preventative program or where you spray given times of warm weather planting, cold weather planting, 2 or 3, 4 or 5 applications, realizing over the last 2 years what we've seen?
That's a great question. Because of lack of information, and based on what I saw last year, I would say minimum of 2 chemigations, probably right when the pegging begins, because again, it looks like there's a lot of damage can occur there. At least 1 chemigation there, probably 2. Once the plant's established and or thinned or transplants, I think you almost have to go, not so much with the presence of the bug, because again, it's hard to find in some situations, and they do tend to come in waves, it seems like. So it's easy to identify when a wave comes in. But one slide I left out is that when we looked at all this sampling, what we oftentimes saw was that for every 1 bug that we saw or counted on a plant, we equated that to 3 plants within that block that had damage symptoms. So we're missing something. It's not a 1-to-1, 1 bug to 3 plants. We can find 3 plants with damage and only 1 plant with bugs. So maybe basing subsequent applications could be on damage.
Well, are they moving from plant to plant?
Absolutely. I've seen them. I watched them do it.
So then when you get to a good stand establishment, coddling size, you're way too late if you haven't done anything at that point.
Based on what I saw this year, that's based on what I saw this year. If you haven't done anything once you've got, and you know what, that can be like 2 or 3 days after sprinklers, after wet days, right? I mean, those plants are popping.
Or a week after.
Yep. Oh, establishment, absolutely, absolutely.
John, historically though, I thought you guys were treating for whiteflies as soon as the thing was out of the ground.
Well, most people are using soil insecticides, or not necessarily right out of the ground. It depends on the adult population.
Okay.
In many respects.
John, did your formula treatment, the DI 400, show you anything?
I didn't have any in my trial, and I wish I will this next coming year. And again, that's a good question, because the insect has to feed to get the toxin in any kind of soil systemic, and whether they will cause damage in the process of killing, because those admire plots I have, you can find dead bugs on them. There's no question, it's killing the bug. The question is how much damage occurred in the interim, and I don't know that at this point. We should have a good feel for it next year. Thank you.